Hello, Kelsey Fischer.
Hello, Josh Edlow.
Welcome to the Edlow podcast. I don't have any fancy music to let you in, but here you are. You're here.
There's always
Big
room to improve.
thanks. So, for those listeners who don't know Kelsey, I would say so. We've known each other what now? Over a decade, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was. Oh, you was it your first in between your first and second year that you started clerking at Dreyer Babich?
I clerked for the summer before my first year in law school, but it was just the summer. So it doesn't really count in Dreyer Babich years.
Right.
And then I came back between my second and third year of law school.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. So I've known you for quite a while. Then I mean, almost 50, probably closer to 15 years. Then I would think it's
Yeah.
been quite a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I would say for those who don't know Kelsey, I would say she is probably one of the smartest, most capable attorneys I know. I'm not just saying that because you're my friend, although that does have something to do with it. And you're actually, when you're in a firm like ours, we always bounce back and forth and talk about case values and things like that. And the thing is I think you're the one I go to when I have novel issues of law that I've never dealt with before, because somehow, some way you've always dealt with it and prevailed on these weird issues of law. So Kelsey's incredibly intelligent, has tried cases, has done a fabulous job in a very intense position. So I'm really glad to have you on here to talk about the specific issues that we're going to talk about. Specifically, a topic that we've talked about offline a lot, being a woman in just kind of a male-dominated field with a bunch of Type A personality guys in the law. So yeah, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah, this is exciting. So I want to start by just getting a little bit of background on you. Where exactly did you grow up?
I grew up in Danville, California, east of San Francisco. And I grew up, it's like a, suburb of a suburb of a suburb in a pretty affluent area, which is an interesting part of who I am, I guess. But it was a nice place to grow up.
And tell me about your family dynamics. So what did your dad do, your mom do? Where do you fall in the birth line?
Okay. I'm the youngest and only girl. I have two older brothers. One is 16 years older than me. He's a half brother. And my dad was always in sales. He's a born salesman, much like my middle brother. And he used to lease hospital equipment. That's one thing I remember. And then when we were in middle school, I think he went into residential real estate. So he made a career switch and really enjoyed working for himself at that point. My dad has always said, you can't have a job like that unless you have someone in your household that has a stable career. So my mom has always had a more stable career. She's been in telecommunications marketing since forever. They're now retired, which is great. They love being retired and traveling. But my mom has been a huge influence on me just because she's always been a working mom, and I always kind of aspired to be that myself.
That was going to be my next question. Do you looking back now, did your mom, your dad instill any specific values in you that you think attributed to the success of your career today?
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like I'm pretty early in my career, but I do think that my mom and her being very career driven, she always was, she had a stable career. People always wanted to be on her team. She was always desired in positions and moving to different positions because people wanted her to work for them. I think that my mom being a working mom was a huge factor in who I am today.
Okay. Did your mom ever did you ever have like conversations with your mom about that type of stuff? Did you ever say, Was there ever, do you ever remember specifically her giving you any sort of advice when it came to that?
Well, I think my mom sometimes has some like, mom guilt, as I'm learning now, we all have, but oh, I always thought that it was bad that we would have dinner at 9 p.m. But my mom would drive home from Silicon Valley, get dinner on the table at 9, and we would sit together and have dinner every night, no matter how late she was working. And so it was a priority for her to have this family dynamic and have this career that she loves so much, even if we had to stay up past our bedtime once in a while in a week. So my mom still says, oh, I hope I didn't screw you guys up by not being around, but I always remember her being around. And even better, I remember her doing that for us, having those dinners and making the family a priority as well as her job.
Ah, interesting. It's interesting that you bring that up because my mom was not a working mom. She stayed home virtually, my whole life. She did. I don't ever remember. She had odd jobs here and there where she would like clean houses and things, but never anything full time. And one of her, I think she would even say one of the things that she always wished she would have done was go and finish her degree. And she always expressed to me that she would have that she wanted to be a registered nurse or a dental hygienist. And well, go ahead. What were you saying?
I had a law school professor who said the best thing you can do for your career is to finish your education before your spouse, which for women is especially important because all of us, it's really hard to lose an income or to, lose someone that's staying home with the kids. And so I've always really thought that was important, that women should at least give the best effort to finish their education and then their spouse go do theirs as well. But that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. My mom, she was going to school, as was my dad. Neither one of them ever finished college. They started but didn't finish, and neither one, they ended up having kids, and they ended up doing things, and life got in the way. And I know both of them kind of have voiced. I don't think either of them have any regrets with the way their lives went. I'm sure everybody has something they wish they could have changed, but I think that they're content with where their lives are. But I know that for her, that was something that she always wanted to finish, and that had an impact on me because I was like, I am going to get a degree. You know what I mean? I'm going to go to college. So that's interesting.
I do think too, my mom used to say, you have so much more opportunities than I've ever had. And because she grew up in the 50s and 60s and women weren't playing sports in college. And it was a lot harder for women to go to law school. And she was expected to get married in her 20s. And her kind of reiterating that made me want to pursue these dreams that maybe she had too, but didn't really get to have the opportunity to do so.
Ah, that's interesting. So you mentioned sports in college. You are a competitive golfer, actually played in this NCAA golf, right?
Yeah, I played at UC Davis, and we were we were transferring to Division I, so I played Division I my entire time there. And it was a great way to go through college, just play free golf and go to school sometimes.
Now, were you on a scholarship for that?
Yeah, I was given a partial scholarship. So I'm not sure how it broke down, but it did provide, I think it paid for my, like a portion of my tuition.
Nice.
Yeah.
Who got you into golf?
My dad and my brother. So I'm the youngest, as I said, and my dad and my brother play a lot, and they're both very good. And so growing up, I always wanted to do what they were doing. And so my dad would take me out, and he had this fun where I grew up playing golf. At the fourth hole, there was a snack shack. So if we played 4 holes, we get whatever we wanted at the snack shack. And it was a great dad bribe.
Nice. When did you start playing college I'm not playing college, but when did you start playing golf?
I had a club in my hand when I was really young, like 5, kid. But then I was also playing other sports. So I was playing basketball and swimming and what else did I do? I don't know. Lots of other sports. And then when I got into high school was the first time that I said, oh, maybe I should take this a little bit more seriously, because the others, I was never a basketball player. But there was potential for me to succeed in golf, which was a growing sport at that time. And because of Title IX, schools were adding golf programs. And so there was opportunity out there for me.
So in the time that so tell me more about that. I don't know the history too much of Title IX. Why were they just then starting to open up these golf?
Yeah. So what happened? Okay. So Title IX was passed in 1973.
Right.
And it took a long time to figure out how this would play out for sports and how this would in the sports world. So there was a lot of litigation in the 90s, in the early 2000s about Title IX says you have to provide the same opportunity to women and men at publicly funded institutions. So specifically, I know UC Davis said we need to provide the same spots on NCAA teams for women and men in order to comply with Title IX. And so they added women's golf. And then actually after, they've added equestrian, beach volleyball, field hockey. They've added a lot of women's sports in order to provide the same opportunities. So there was a period of time where people were trying to figure out what it meant to be in compliance. And that's how some schools defined it. And golf is really easy to add because you don't need to provide facilities. You just use a different course, or the same course. And there's generally a men's team that you can mirror what they're doing off of.
Nice. So is that what encouraged you to go to UC Davis? There wasn't like
So UC Davis started a team my freshman year. So I was on the inaugural women's golf team, which was really appealing to me because I don't know, always wanted to sounds so lame, but be a leader. I didn't want to sit on the bench. I had some opportunities to do that at other schools, but at Davis, I could play my first year and I could be the captain on the team really easy, and not easy, but I could take more of a leadership role earlier. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that sounds terrible. I mean, yeah, you want to be a leader. That's great. So was there a sense to you of, okay, I get to be on this inaugural team? Was there kind of like a historical thing that you're like, oh, that's cool, I could be like the first woman in UC Davis golf? Or
I loved it. I love that whole aspect of it.
Wow. Well, I mean, you should. That's remarkable, right? I mean, it's a big deal. So did you play all 4 years?
Yeah, I was on the team all 4 years. I will say my fourth year, golf wasn't necessarily my priority. So my game wasn't very good, but I maybe was taking the LSAT or doing other things that I was never going to, be a professional golfer. So I kind of transitioned to a student athlete towards the end of my time there.
So did your grades improve over time there? Because were you more focused on golf at the beginning and then kind of transitioned away from it?
I think any athlete will tell you that your grades get better as you just become more familiar in what is expected of you. Maybe all students would say that too, but just my experience and my friends' experience too. But yes, definitely my grades improved and my golf game didn't.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing, but I was going to ask you about this going back into high school. Were you always somebody that tended to do well in school? I mean, did you always have good grades?
I had okay grades. I wasn't like the top of my class. I wasn't the smartest kid in the room, but I did okay.
Yeah, because I got to tell you, I was a student athlete in high school, and when I was playing in high school, I mean, my high school, if you were an athlete, you didn't have to do anything. I mean, and
golf is different. fine.
Yeah, definitely. I was playing basketball, and it just felt like it was a completely different deal. Like, I mean, there was not a lot of expectation. I don't know what it was like in your high school. I never met with a counselor or anything like that.
Yeah, my high school was, one of those where I felt like it was an exception or a expectation that you're going to a 4-year college.
Mm.
And actually, my goal in high school was to a UC, and so that was also a huge decision why I went to UC Davis.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, when I went to school, I mean, I started at community college, and I had a real hard time at the beginning, and my grades vastly improved over time because I just hadn't developed the study skills. I hadn't really, I don't think I tell my son this all the time. I was like, I don't think I ever did homework the entire time I was in high school and passed all my classes fine. So you get to college and then you're like, oh wow, I really had, like, they don't care if you show up, they'll just drop you if you don't show up. And then you actually have to do the work,
Right.
and so it was a pretty tough transition. So you're doing golf, all that, your grades improve. At what point did you say, hey, I want to go to law school?
I think it's something that I always had in the back of my mind. I don't know if you were like this or know kids like this that were always a little argumentative, and people say, oh, you should go to law school. So it was always in the back of my mind. But then as a student athlete, I wasn't sure that was going to be my future. But then once I started focusing a little bit more on school, so I'd say probably my junior year in college, I decided, okay, this is the path that I think I want to go on.
What was it about the law that interested you?
Well, okay, so I have this huge interest in Title IX at that time. And what does compliance mean? I sat on a committee at UC Davis that kind of decided on that, and I was enthralled with that process and the school trying to decide what is the meaning of this. And actually, my deposition was noticed, which is so funny now. My deposition was noticed when I was in college, and UC Davis's counsel calls me and says, like, what's your involvement on this committee? I'm like, I just go and represent female student athletes. I don't make any decisions, don't take my deposition. But now I love that. That'd be great.
Yeah.
So, and then I think that so my mom, again, she said, I wish I had gone to law school. I think that that's a huge part of why I was driven to go this path. But I also was just intrigued by a profession that would push me to use my mind in this way. Like, my brain doesn't work math, science in that way at all, but I do think my brain works well this way. So I thought it'd be a profession that I could go into, that I could use my brain and stimulate that aspect daily.
Nice. When you thought about law school, did you think about, well, before I go back into that, I want to actually ask you, what did you do on the Title IX committee? What was it that you guys were doing?
So I was just a 20-year-old on a committee with, other people making decisions and actually having conversations. But so we would look at the number of opportunities. So what the school had deemed was compliance. We would look at the number of opportunities of each sport and how could we be more in compliance according to how the school had defined that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything specific that you had to argue for while you were on there, or something that you were real passionate about, or was it just, did you feel like you were kind of there as just they needed students on there and you were one because you happened to be, or do you feel like you really were engaged in the process?
I mean, now I would have had a different engagement level, 100%. At the time, I think at the time I was critically thinking about, would field hockey be a good addition to UC Davis athletics? But I don't know. I was there as a representative of female student athletes and tried to do my best to do that. But, I was 20 years old and didn't know much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's interesting because that probably, I would imagine, even though you It's funny when you look back, like I even look back now in my career, I look back at old cases I had when I was like a first, second, third year attorney. And I look at it now as a 10-year attorney and a partner at the firm. I go, oh man, if I had that case now, do you have any idea how much better or like how different I would have approached that case?
Right.
And so I'm sure that you look back and you're like, man, with the knowledge I have now, had I been on that committee, but that's part of your story. Like that's what makes you become who you are now. So I imagine for a 20-year-old kid, you did great. Granted, I don't want to, unless you want to tell me your age, I don't want to age you here.
Oh, I'm 34. I'll be 35 this month.
Look, yeah. So 35. I mean, I'm sure as a 35-year-old professional woman, you would act differently on that committee than you did as a 20-year-old college student. But still, it's part of your story. So you wanted to go to law school. Was there a specific area of law when you started that you were thinking that you wanted to go into?
I mean, I went in as an open book. I was really I really didn't know. I thought maybe, Title IX litigation is like all over the place. So it's like mostly in education. That wasn't really interesting to me. I thought like, how do you get into athletics? That's also a weird path to do through law school. But what I did want to do, and I like always have felt this way, is I did want to represent individuals, and I did not want to represent corporations.
Right. And that totally tracks with that's what I know about you. You were not going to do good with corporations or insurance companies. So, so when was it? So how did you end up at Dreyer Babich?
A friend of, I was working at El Macero Country Club in the pro shop, and someone asked me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I'm planning on taking the LSAT and going to law school. And they said, I have a friend who hires young people who want to go to law school. And I called the firm and got a summer job.
Nice. And did you ever in your wildest dreams, I'm just asking you this because I know my experience, did you ever in your wildest dreams think, I'm going to go into personal injury?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. I don't think I knew what I was getting myself into at that time. I do have family friends that are personal injury attorneys that I just knew them as trial attorneys, growing up. Right. And I thought that sounds fun, but yeah, I don't know. I've never really thought about that.
Yeah. I can just tell you that when I went into law school, all I knew was I wanted to try cases, and I knew that prosecutors tried a lot of cases.
Right.
So like my thought was I was going to become I was going to work at a DA's office somewhere and put criminals in jail. That's what I thought I was going to do. And then when in that time frame when we were trying to do that, 2008, 2009, like there was not a lot of jobs. No jobs. I mean, I couldn't even get a call back for a volunteer position at a lot of different places.
Well, my theory is 2008 was the recession. Everyone goes to law school because they can't get other jobs. And so when we were graduating, you're 2012?
Yeah, I'm 2012.
Yeah, 2013, law school. When we were graduating, there were like no jobs because there were so many lawyers.
Yeah. In fact, there was a number. I was lucky enough that when I went into taking the bar, I had already been offered a position working with Roger Dreyer. And but I found out that the percentages of McGeorge grads that had a job going into the bar exam, it was like 15%. It was like not a huge number.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow, I am really, really lucky. I later regretted that. Thought maybe I wasn't that lucky the first year, but at the time, and I say that jokingly because I'm still there, but I mean, it was,
it could be painful.
Yeah, I'm still in that place. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, there was not a lot of jobs, and I remember applying for them and just never even getting a call back from anybody until I knew a guy who knew Roger, and I got hired on the spot. It sounds like you had kind of a similar experience, at least with getting in with the firm. So
Yep.
yeah. And then you worked for the summer, and then you went to Hastings, right?
I went to UC Hastings, who is in the process of changing their name.
Are they? Where are they changing it to?
I think UC, no, San Francisco College of the Law, I think.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Why the change?
There was don't quote me on this, but there was an extensive committee and effort to research the Hastings, Mr. Hastings, I forget his first name, and the committee came back and determined there were issues of like genocide against Native people that they didn't feel comfortable going forward with that name.
Interesting.
Now, I'm not an expert. I've read a couple emails about it. That's
a very Bay Area decision to make.
They at least like did this committee and did the research to make this decision, which I thought was appropriate.
Right. It's interesting because was there kind of I don't know much about UC Hastings like lately, but I mean I know like with the team that's usually formerly the Washington Redskins, there was like a lot of upheaval that kind of led to them changing the name. Was there something like that? Were there some people kind of saying, hey, like maybe we shouldn't be named after this Hastings guy?
My impression was there was pressure to change the name and to reconsider whether or not we want that name on our institution.
Interesting. Okay. So now you come in and you do the summer job in personal injury with the firm. Did you notice that there were things immediately that you liked about it, or was it just kind of a job for you at that point?
I mean, I fully drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked the competitive nature of it. As a former athlete. That was really attractive to me.
Yeah, me too.
And I really liked that, I could call my client and say, hey, Mrs. Smith, this is what's going on. Not at that time, but, you could see our bosses doing that. And you could have a conversation with them and advise them through something that was difficult for them. Instead of, I was seeing my friends take these big law jobs in San Francisco where they're being paid so much more money than we were. And it didn't seem as fulfilling and was more doc review and that kind of stuff, which myself.
I'm sorry. It sounded like you broke up there. Were you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
What did you say? You said it was so much more fulfilling, and you kind of froze up on me.
Oh, I think the end of my thought was it seemed more fulfilling to be able to impact people's lives in this way than to, kind of go this other corporate route.
That's interesting that you bring that up because I eventually did I had a similar experience. Like I came in and for me, when I took the job, it was just like, it was the only place that would hire me. You know what I mean? It was the only place that I even got an interview. So, and they offered to pay me, which I was like looking for anything with experience. So I was like, this is great. Right. And then we got in there and I saw how competitive it was. And man, I don't know if you ever think about this, but I think about the other attorneys that clerked at the same time I did. And all of them now are incredibly successful attorneys for the most part. I mean, like if you look at all of the big named guys in personal injury now, they all came from that time frame. Even the ones that weren't great, they've become successful in their own ways. And a lot of the guys that a lot of people who stayed, like you, me, John Wisman, Larry Fan, we all were clerking at that same time. Ryan Dostart, Robbie Nelson, like we all became successful attorneys, and we were all very competitive. And I later did an internship at the Sutter County District Attorney's Office, and I share this story often. I got a chance to do preliminary hearings in domestic violence cases. And there were a couple of things that it turned me definitely, because I kind of felt like maybe I want to do personal injury, but I still wanted to see if this is maybe more of what I wanted to do, being a prosecutor. But there were a couple of things that I found really interesting about that. And one of the things is even though you're putting criminals in jail, you don't have a client. Your client is the people.
Right.
And particularly when you were dealing with domestic violence, often the victims didn't want your help. And it was so hard for me to be sitting there looking at a woman who had clearly been physically abused. And just because of things that have happened, my own life experience, that is a big trigger for me, seeing that. And they just, they've been hurt and they're recanting right in front of you. I can remember specifically having a woman on the stand and I'm trying to force her to testify to me about this guy who had beat her up, couldn't get the information. And I was so deflated. And I remember actually an investigator, and I can't remember his name, nor would I share it here, I guess, but he came out and he said, something along the effect of like, what'll probably end up happening is he'll end up killing her. She's a repeat. She's been here a bunch of times. He'll end up killing her and we'll get him for murder. And it was so nonchalant. I remember just going, I don't ever want to be that desensitized to life, and also here, I get that same feeling that you just shared. Like you have a client who can't help themselves. They don't know how to deal with it. You got this giant insurance company where there's an adjuster there. I share with a lot of my new clients. I tell them, I go, imagine you're going and playing a chess game for the first time against someone who plays chess 20 times a day, 5 days a week. You're going to lose that chess game every single time because you don't even know the rules.
Right. That's really, yeah.
And so you get to come in there, and often, luckily where we're at Dreyer Babich, we get to work with seriously injured clients who really need help. And so there's a fulfilling satisfaction to that, and it sounds like you had the same experience.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's interesting that you got that experience because I worked there full time for 3 years. You were there for a summer and then you came back for another summer. And then you came back for a while also waiting for bar results, right?
Yeah. I came back, but I was told I'd have a job when I passed the bar. Yeah, at that point.
Well, lucky you. Jeez. You didn't have to go through the grueling 3 years that all the rest of us had to go through.
I know the joke is I summered at Dreyer Babich. I'm like, I guess I did, but it didn't feel like a summer vacation.
But the funny thing was, though, I would say I don't remember. I remember you being there the first time, but I specifically remember the time in between you were there because I think I had just taken the bar and was becoming an attorney. And so I was working more with Roger at that time. And I remember them specifically saying how impressed they were that you could do attorney level work at that time, even though you hadn't been at the firm that long. So I remember thinking, well, okay, well, they're definitely going to hire her. You know what I mean? And so yeah, you came in, you and Schneiderman, didn't you guys both come in at the same time?
Yeah.
Oh man, what a contrast.
The first time I met him, I said, you're one of those guys I would have hated in law school.
Me too. When he first came in, oh man, he first came in and I remember thinking he was just, he was so.
Oh, let's not talk about him.
He was so arrogant, but he was such a great guy. Like I just loved him. Just makes me laugh. Anyway, I digress. So let me ask you real quick. This is a question I wanted to ask you before we get into, the women's issues. But up until that point, what would you say up until the time before you go to law school? What would you say your biggest challenge was up until that point?
Before I went to law school?
Yeah.
Wow. I haven't really thought about it. I think that like, okay, being a student athlete was hard. That was a challenge for me. I also think coming into my own a little bit.
What do you mean by that?
I am the little sister of a older brother that's kind of bigger than life. And he was he was a high school star athlete. I played on the golf team. So, he played football and basketball and baseball, and I was kind of the little sister. So I think that I came into my own in college, but even more so in law school. And then once I moved to Sacramento, actually.
Okay. So just kind of coming into your own identity, I guess, defining who you are.
I guess. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Without, being too cheesy about it. Like that's what you're saying. Like
it feels really cheesy, but I will be the first to admit, not a ton of challenges in my life up to that point.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know. I feel very blessed and privileged for everything I had and have, and the opportunities that were given to me at that point, for sure.
So we've actually talked about this quite a bit, just in passing and discussing different views on life. And our upbringings were very different in that, I mean, like you said, you've kind of admitted here and talked about how you lived in an affluent area, and it seems like your parents, did really well, and everyone kind of, if someone hearing this, might go like, well, it sounds like you had a lot of advantages, and you don't shy away from that. You did. Right.
Yep.
Whereas like in my life, I mean, I had two parents that both tried very hard to be supportive, but there were definitely a lot more challenges, financially, and others. There were a lot of challenges. And do you think that your affluent lifestyle, and seeing that not everybody had that lifestyle, kind of made you want to help people more? I mean, I guess tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that going to college was eye-opening for me. Leaving our little Danville bubble was eye-opening for me, that not everyone, I mean, I knew that, but to kind of meet people and interact with people more that didn't grow up the way that I did. That was eye-opening to me. And then doing what we do, we get to meet so many different people that span all kinds of lifestyles. We just get to meet a lot of different people. And I think that, I don't know if the way I grew up made me more empathetic, but I do think that, like, my mom has always been super empathetic and wanting to help others and try to instill that in us. But I think, I do remember college being the first time being like, okay, yeah, this is not everything is the way that I grew up. I don't know. That sounds terrible.
No, it's not terrible. I can tell you, like, for me, I remember when I went on my mission for my church and leaving for 2 years and going to it. I mean, I lived in Sacramento my whole life, right? I mean, I only went out of state maybe twice, before then. And so it's not really the same thing, but it kind of is. I mean, I went to Indiana, which is way different. It's more segregated. There, like when I lived in South Bend from late 2001 to mid 2002, I mean, everything south of Notre Dame is poor projects, mainly people of color. And everything north is rich, affluent, Catholic white people, and seeing that and hearing the stories of people, saying like, this is, I mean, the Ku Klux Klan, I believe, started in Indiana. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like when you hear, those things and see people living that way, it wakes you up to, wow, like there are some people that some really dire situations. So yeah, I mean, you get out of your own bubble and you see all sorts of different things, and it makes you kind of a little more wise.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not, yeah.
Now, what I wanted to really hone in on, we've spent a lot of time talking about you and getting your background, but I wanted to talk with you about just generally some women's issues. So before we really start talking about law school and the law, I wanted to ask, do you have a time in mind where you remember the first time where you really realized that sexism was a real thing?
I don't have a time in mind. I
Okay.
think that, you know, my mom, to talk about her again, but kind of told me stories about her experience growing up, her experience being in the workforce. I remember her telling me a story that she took this test that you had to take to work for the government at that time, and she scored number 2 on the test of everyone that took it, and she got no job offers because they offered them to men that were not mothers that, you know, maybe had. So I think maybe that was probably my first introduction to women are not necessarily always treated the same as men are. But yeah, just hearing stories from my mom.
Oh, okay. And so you go to law school, you graduate. Obviously, you're an attorney now.
Mhm.
Uh, am I right that you worked on a political campaign?
No, so I spent my last semester in college interning for Senator Boxer in Washington, D.C.
Ah, okay. Tell me about that experience.
It was great. DC is a great place to be as a 22-year-old. It was really fun. I loved it because no one's from there. So
Hmm.
you'd meet people and you'd be like, hey, where are you from? What are you working on here? It was kind of a fun experience. But I answered phones, took constituent phone calls. I gave tours of the Capitol. That was really fun. And then I would write memos for, I mean, it wasn't in-depth work that us unpaid interns were doing, but it was a great experience to be on the Hill and for work for Senator Boxer. It was really fun.
How did you end up working for Senator Boxer versus somebody else? Was there a reason
I
specifically?
really wanted to take the opportunity to work on the Hill, and so I interviewed with, you know what, my congressperson was in flux at the time. Ellen Tosher had been assigned to the State Department. And so I interviewed with both Feinstein's office and Boxer's office and ended up getting an intern position at Boxer's office for the semester.
Oh, interesting. And I'm assuming at some point you got to meet her and talk with her and stuff.
I met her a couple times, had some photo shoots, very casual surface, short conversations.
Nice. So, did you think that? I mean, did you value that experience?
Yep, I loved it.
Were you ever interested in actually going into politics or?
I was interested in lawmaking, like not as a politician, but working for the legislature and writing laws in that way. But once I started really working at Dreyer Babich, it seemed faster paced, more of the competitive nature that I like, where writing laws is a little bit more passive.
Right. So, so what was it that caused you to take the job at Dreyer Babich, and what was it that drew you to the trial work aspect of it?
I mean, I like as I've said before, I like the competition. I like that we get to try to win, and that's part of our job. We're trying to win every day. And I was really pushed by Chris Wood, who was my supervisor at that time. I was really pushed in my like what he was asking me to do in terms of thinking and research and writing. And I thought I saw like a lot of growth potential in that aspect.
Nice. Now, so you started a year after me,
Yes.
and then we had that. This will be a personal story, but me, and Snyderman ended up in the annex for a while. We had about, how long were we back there? Like 4, 6 months, something like that.
I think it was 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah, we were for a little story for people who know, I have no idea what we're talking about. There was a flood in our office, and Kelsey, Dan, Snyderman, and I's offices got flooded, and so they moved us to this really remote area of.
And Judge Hayes, don't forget.
Oh, that's right, and Judge Hayes. Yeah, that's right.
Baby,
yeah.
so he was around.
Yeah, and so Judge Hayes too. We all got moved to the annex, and I don't know what happened to Judge Hayes. I don't remember him ever really being in the office with us. I think he ended up taking the time to work from home. I don't remember him ever being there, but the three of us were back there a lot every day, and I felt like we all really bonded during that 6 months there. And but over the years, what I've noticed is, our trajectory has been very similar, but it's also been different in a lot of ways. And some of it has just been the progression of our careers of just what we've been asked to do has been different, but there's also how we've been treated has certainly been different. And we've had a lot of discussions that I found really interesting and informative for me as, a straight white man, about how you've been treated differently based on your gender. And it's really opened my eyes talking with you and the other women at our firm about that experience. And so let's start with this. If a young woman was thinking, that came to you and said, hey, Kelsey, I'm thinking about going into law. What are some of the things in general that you think that they're going to have to be prepared for, that a man probably wouldn't have to even think about?
Well, the first thing you say to anybody, man or woman, is make sure you're 100% sure you want to do it. You want to be a lawyer. Because things have changed. You don't just really go to law school to go to law school anymore, I don't think. Right. I think that get your education first. I thought that was really good advice that was given to me while I was in law school.
What do you mean by that? You mean like what you said earlier about get your education before your spouse, or what do you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that is something to consider. If you want to do it, devote your time to it while you're young before you have a family, because things change drastically. I mean, I'm only 6 months into it, but things change drastically as soon as you try to have a career as a woman and a family.
So that's actually really interesting. I want to highlight that difference real quick before you go on, because it's so interesting that you would say that to a woman, because as you know, I went through law school, and I mean, I walked in with 1 kid and came out with 3 and 1 on the way, and that was never ever suggested to me, nor a thought for me. Now, obviously I wasn't the one having the kids. I mean, but at the same time, it wouldn't even have crossed my mind that I would have to do that before I had a family. I mean, I knew it was going to be harder for me having a family.
Yeah.
But it was never something that like seemed impossible or super hard. And I think that this is go ahead.
A really good picture of how different we are.
Right.
Because I feel like I went my whole life of I need to start my career and get going in that regard before I start a family. Mm-hmm. And that was something always in the back of my mind, where, because of your faith and it's encouraged to start a family a little bit younger.
Yeah.
I never felt that I needed to start a family younger. In fact, I was adamant that wasn't for me. I knew I wanted to be a mom, but the thought of starting a family young before I got my career started was not something that I considered.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Do you think part of that was also just you've talked a lot about your mom and her influence? You think there was some of that to it? You said that your oldest sibling is 16 years older than you and is a half sibling, mm-hmm. right? Yep. Is that your mom's or your dad's? Okay.
We have the same mom, different dads.
Okay, so how old was your mom when they had that kid?
I think she was in her early 20s.
So do you think that might have had an influence on your decision?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. And I think that she raised me with the thought of, it's a lot easier to be a career woman if you're not juggling kids and raising kids and all that entails.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting how our parents, their advice influences them. Like you and I actually were talking in preparation for this earlier this morning at the office, and you were asking me a little bit about my family dynamic and I'm a Mormon, for lack of a better term. And you asked me, you're like, I just assumed you always grew up in the church, and I did. But my mom married my dad, who was Jewish, and he later became Mormon. And she, she always told me, she was like, I wouldn't do anything differently. And sometimes I wonder if that's true. But she said, I wouldn't do anything differently. But it would be so much easier had I married someone who was a member of our faith versus somebody who wasn't. Not to say she'd change anything, but it definitely would be easier. And it sounds like you got maybe a similar conversation from your mom. Like, I wouldn't change having your brother. I love him so much, but had I to do it over again, it would have been better to do it this way. Do you think that you ever had that, or did you just assume that?
Yeah, I probably assumed it. I don't think she ever got to that point. But I do know that she thought she got married young. She felt maybe pressure from her family to get married younger instead of continuing on with school and continuing on other paths, just because of the time that it was. And that was what you did when you graduated college and your parents cut you off, you got married.
Do you think now that you're 34 and congratulations, you just had a baby not too long ago, and she's how old now?
Tomorrow.
6 months old. Okay. So you're old hat at this now. You know what you're doing.
Pro.
Do you have a bunch of people asking you, like, so when are you gonna have another one? Do you have that? Or is that a Mormon thing?
I think it's a Mormon thing. They do, once you have one, they do ask you more, but we struggled to get pregnant, probably because we started late. So that's something else to consider if you're going to do your career first. We don't know why, but and so we are very lucky and happy to have one.
So I guess what I'm asking is, now looking back, you're 34, almost 35. Do you think that you, knowing what you know now, you would have done the same thing, or do you think you might have changed some of those things a little bit? Do you think maybe I didn't need to wait that long or anything like that, or do you think that you're obviously you're good with your decisions, but I mean, would you give your daughter the same advice?
Yes, but I am going to encourage her to freeze her eggs in her mid-20s.
Got it. Right on. Anything else that you think you would share? I kind of cut you off there, that you would share with a young woman who is wanting to go to law school, just in general?
I have had this conversation with women that want to go to law school of, there are certainly jobs and areas in the law that are not what we do, that it's not litigation, a lot of time spent on this job. There's less competitive, there's other things to do. So if you're intimidated by a male-dominated field, there are areas in the law that maybe aren't like that and aren't so competitive. You just have to look for them.
Yes, that feeds into one of the questions that was asked. So for those who are listening who maybe don't follow social media on this podcast, I always ask in the 24 hours before someone comes on, if anyone has any questions they want me to ask anonymously to a guest, I'm willing to do that. And one of the questions that came up that I thought this probably feeds into is, why do you think there aren't more female trial attorneys?
I think there's a lot of factors.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about this today, but there are more women that go to law school than men. And it has been that way for the last, I think 10, 15 years. It's like 60% female.
It certainly was that way when I was in law school. There were way more women than men.
Yeah, I think it's about 60% on average female to male. But the practice of law does not look like that. And I think that is because I think it's hard to be a lawyer and be a mom. It's hard to be a full-time lawyer and be a full-time and raise a family. I think that women burn out because it is, it is trying and difficult to kind of be in a high pressure environment, but men burn out that way too. But I also think that women are more likely to get out of the workforce other than men when they do have families, and it's harder to get back in, especially get back in as an attorney at a later date.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there's one thing also I think that kind of feeds into that you and I have talked about before, and we even talked about, I think we talked about it this morning. We were talking about your daughter, and you were talking about how you tend to be the one to take all the time off to go to doctor's appointments and things of that nature, and how your husband, he's a doctor, right? He's a surgeon at Kaiser. And so you're living like the Cosby life. And he was like, well, I could take time off for those types of things. I mean, and he is a doctor, so it would make sense. But you put it on yourself that you as the mother feel almost a need to be at all those things.
Yeah. I mean, there's a thing called mommy guilt, and I didn't think that it would apply to me before, when I was 9 months pregnant. I didn't think that I would be like this, but I do think that I feel pressure either both societally and internally to be the one that goes to these doctor's appointments, to be the one that checks out the nanny at night, to ask her questions, how the day went, how did Josie do today, whatever I feel I know I'm putting on myself, that my husband is capable and willing to do that, but I am putting on myself for whatever reason I feel like I need to do that. And actually, 2 points on this. My mom has said, as a working mom, she would, we had a bake sale at school or something, and she would hand make cookies and spend all night baking cookies to bring, because she felt like, as a working mom, I need to do more as a mom. And there would be a stay-at-home mom that just brought store-bought cookies and thought that she was contributing in the same way, and she'd be so mad, like, how dare you do that? So, but then Patrick actually brought to my attention this study, and I'm not going to get it right, but it was something like women who work in the workforce and have kids feel like they have to do more household things in order to compensate for the time they spend away from the child.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like I don't know, something that's ingrained in us to be like, and this could just be me and my mom, but like, I need to show that I am doing both things as well as I possibly can.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I think it's real, like I said, it's a thing. Like, for example, I mean, my first year of practice, like we talked about this before. You just recently, you've been back now from maternity leave for a couple of months.
2, yeah.
And you're like raring to go. You're like, I'm ready to get back into the swing of things, get into trial. You have a trial coming up, and everyone's kind of trying to treat you with kid gloves, right? Because you're like, oh, well, you're a new mom and you want to get you used to it and stuff. And I remember thinking, I was like, that was so not my experience. I mean, my first year of practice, I didn't, but I mean, my last child was born during my first year of practice. I took a week off, and then I was back, and I was criticized for taking a week off, and no one thought that I should take any time off, or that I didn't, you know what I mean? Like, I almost felt like I was like, I mean, I did just have a kid. Can I have a week? You know what I mean? And so again, another really different experience for a woman in this field than a man,
Yeah. I mean, biologically, there is a need for us to take more time off, but
right.
But there's a expectation that you're not. And the same thing happened to my husband. He got 8 days and like barely that. But it's a little bit different because I do feel there's like, let's make sure that you're comfortable with the kid, your daughter being at home. And I'm trying to be like, no, I'm ready to go. Let's go. Let's do it.
Now I hear of some women, they talk about coming back to work, and you talked about mommy guilt. And I remember I've heard of a number of women who they have a really hard time at the beginning coming back, just emotionally. Did you have that, or did you feel like, I'm really ready to come back? I know I've heard of some women who they're crying for days, and I didn't get that sense from you necessarily. That you seemed, not that I'm not saying like
no,
you didn't feel it, but I mean like you were, like you said, you're so driven that like you're just like, I'm ready to go, and you could go. How to explain how that felt for you?
I had a little bit of it. First couple days, not to I know it's a lot harder for most women to go back to work. I definitely had a little bit of it, but I also was trying to work from home with a newborn.
Oh,
and while, I was trying to get some cases settled and keep contacts with my clients and reviewing discovery, just stuff that felt like I needed to get done during that time period. And it was impossible. It was really hard. So I was happy to be able to focus and get back to work. It did take a little bit of time to adjust. Like I remember coming home for lunch and dropping off milk so that she could eat that afternoon, and her just losing it. And I'm like, what am I doing? But then I went back to the office and finished some tasks and got some stuff done, and I felt good about it.
Oh man. Yeah. And we talked earlier about some of the things that you have a trial coming up, and it may or may not go in our field. You could have a trial ready to go, and the day before it settles, and then you're like, well, now what do I do for the next 2 weeks?
Continued till who knows when.
Yeah, you continued into perpetuity. Yeah. But tell me some of the things that you thought. I mean, I just thought this was so interesting because we were talking about your trial coming up, and you're like, I got to think about this and that and all these things. What were some of the things that went through your head?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm still breastfeeding, which we'll see how that goes. But I was the trial was going to be in San Jose, and I was thinking, okay, am I going to take the baby with me to San Jose and have my mom stay in a hotel with the baby while I'm working on this trial so that I can feed her? Or am I going to leave her here with my husband, who also has a job that's very time consuming and demanding? Like, what does that look like in terms of even feeding her for the week that I'm gone until I come home for the weekend? And then I do have a friend that tries, she's a DA, and I said, how do you do it? How do you continue to breastfeed and pump and be a mom? And she's like, I have to ask the court for a 15-minute break every 3 hours. And we just take a break, and I go to the break room and I pump. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy.
Right. Man, jeez. It's so funny because, like I said, I mean, Lincoln was born, and I had a trial. I want to say he was born in June, and I think my trial was in October, and it was a month long in Merced, 4.5 days a week, 3 hours away. Nobody said a word.
Now, just imagine if your spouse had a time-consuming, job that also, that's kind of my difficulty right now. But thankfully, we have family and people around to help.
Yeah, and then also you got to think about the single mothers out there, right? Who are doing it on their own. I mean, that's even crazier, So now on top of that, some of these things, like you said, I mean, there are areas of the law that are not as time consuming as what we're doing. I mean, I tell people when they ask me, hey, I'm thinking I want to do what you do. I want to be a trial attorney. I go, it takes, I mean, it is you're a different kind of person if you want to do this, because it's highly competitive. It's high stress. You're under the gun all the time. You're working all the time. I mean, I'm every night before I go to bed, I'm looking at emails. I'm answering emails. I wake up. It's the first thing I do, looking at what happened. If I get a 2 a.m. email from my boss or somewhere else, you know what I mean? Like there's always something. But then on top of that, you're dealing with all of these type A personalities all the time. And one of the questions that was asked, and I thought this was an interesting question, and I'm curious to hear your answer. Does opposing counsel ever try to use physicality to intimidate you?
It's not often, but I do think that it has happened.
Okay.
In that, like using like just like a male stature, right? Like standing up next to me. Even I'm not a small woman, but like, standing up next to me in a way that a woman might not do. I've also had defense counsel get in my face once. And it was at a deposition. We took a break and it was, finger pointing in my face in an aggressive way that I did not like. And I very kindly asked him to go back into the room where the court reporter was, because I felt like I needed somebody else to at least have eyes on the situation. Just to make me feel a little bit more comfortable, and somebody else to see what was going on, because it felt really bizarre.
Yeah. So tell me, obviously you don't need to, I don't want to name here. I do want one offline, but like, give me this, like demographics, like tall, short, fat, older, younger.
It was an older male who, not like an overpowering figure. I wouldn't say like, he's not former wrestler Josh Edlow. But I still felt that, like it just took me aback in that I was being talked to in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you ever had a physical altercation before in your life?
In my life? Not that I can think of, no.
Yeah, okay. Like there's never been like a point where you thought you were going to go to blows with somebody at a bar or something like that?
Not that I'm cognizant of.
Okay. You're like, it could have happened.
One time though, I had some drinks with my brother and I was like puffing my chest and he's like, this is just going to get me in trouble.
You're one of those girls. Yeah. So with that, when you brought him back into the room, did he calm down?
He was still like kind of fired up. And then I suggested that we go back on the record. So I thought that was like a good move to like, okay, we're going to like neutralize the situation and get it back into like a more professional environment. And
real quick before you finish, just so for people who aren't attorneys, means is if you're in a deposition, there's a court reporter who actually takes down everything we say. So if you're off the record, nothing's being typed up. But if you say, let's go back on the record, the court reporter then has to actually take down everything that's being said. So you suggested when he was doing this, hey, let's go back on the record and get this on the record so that whatever you say, I have a record of it, right?
Right. And I feel like it also makes you more conscious of what you're saying, because somebody is writing everything down. It also slows you down because you can't talk over each other. Right. So I thought that was a good move to kind of neutralize the situation and move forward.
Yeah. Wow. So is that the only time that someone's been kind of threatened physicality. Because I got to tell you, like, that's another thing that's completely different for me. But that could also just be my size in general. I mean, you know, I come in generally pretty aggressive, and I'm 6'7". I mean, no one's gonna try to. Very few people would try to. Maybe Roger would, but like no one else really would ever try to mess with me in that way.
Right.
And so that's really interesting. Um, what other difficulties or hurdles do you feel like you've faced that maybe your male counterpart hasn't faced?
I feel like, and I don't know if this is a female thing, but I do think that maybe men come in with a little bit more blind confidence, where women in our field feel like we need to learn how, have more building blocks, learn how everything works, come in a little more studied, a little more prepared in order to, I do think that women in a male dominated field feel like they need to be more prepared than the men in the room, because you're different, because you're going to be looked at a little bit differently, and to be more prepared addresses that difference in a certain way. So I feel like I've never had the blind confidence that maybe somebody that I was hired at the same time as has, but that I really had to earn it for myself, like earn the confidence and build confidence as, I don't know, as a young woman in this field.
I wonder how much of that too, and I think you're generally right with men versus women in the field, but I think also, like, I've seen some men that also feel the same way that you do. I don't know if I've seen a lot of women who come in with a blind confidence, but I wonder how much of that has to do with like life experience. Because like I come from a sales background, right? And so I remember telling people that I was training, I would be like, when I sold cell phones particularly, I would say, listen, you don't have to really know everything about this phone, but you got to sound like you know everything about this phone, And so kind of a fake it till you make it type of thing. And I know for me, that's carried me through. I've used that same kind of, even in my life. Like I remember dealing with a novel issue that I had no idea about at all. And Kelsey Fischer was on maternity leave. So I talking with a defense counsel, and I just like pretended like I knew what I was talking about, and it really carried the weight. You know what I mean? Just even, and so maybe there's some of that to do with that. But I think, yeah, I mean, I can see what you're.
I do think there's a little bit of like they've studied girls and boys in schools, and really young girls are quick to raise their hand, quick to provide an answer, and do not shy away from it. And as they get older, they don't raise their hand and they don't participate as much if it's a co-ed classroom.
Interesting. And have they ever said why they think that is?
I don't know. I'm a sociology major, it's something, societal pressure, or, some way that we're, I don't know. But I think that it's like,
Hello? I think I'm losing you. We're having technical difficulties here. Sounds like we might have lost Miss Fischer. See if we can get her back here. You there?
I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, we missed you there. You kind of froze up for a second.
Oh, it's going to be I
bet. Well, I wanted to talk about this actually. I think this is an interesting thought, because I have heard there was a discussion once that I heard between two people on a podcast about the gender pay gap, right? And one of the social psychologists or psychologist, whoever it was talking about studies that have shown that there are many factors that are not just particularly gender, but things that tend to show up in gender, particularly in women, that attribute also to it. And one of them being agreeableness. And I thought a lot about that because I do know, like, for example, even hearing, and even some of my own thoughts about men versus women, if you get an aggressive man on the other side, right, and he's super aggressive and you have to fight him, the men in the room are kind of like, he's a bulldog, he's a great attorney, he's really aggressive, whereas if a female is doing that, the connotation is much more derogatory.
Yes.
Like, they use bad language and they say how she's terrible and things of that nature. And I wonder if that attributes to that,
yeah, I think being agreeable is something that we are socialized to want to do, and that is detrimental sometimes in our jobs.
Well, and I think also just in probably just the way you're viewed.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, like if you're a man who has a difference of opinion and asserts it aggressively, they're like, wow, he's really confident, or he really means that, he's really serious. But then a woman does it and they're like, well, she's a B, she's this, she's that. And it's just, you're like, it's an interesting double standard that probably contributes to that.
Yeah, I've never thought I could be aggressive in that way. And maybe aggressive isn't the right word, but be
assertive
in that way. But I have really wanted to prove that I'm right and smarter than that other person.
Right. Well, and that's what I think is so interesting is that, I always feel like I know, what I'm talking about when I certainly know my case, when I'm going in and doing something. But yeah, I have noticed that, like, when you go and you are I've seen you in action a few times and you are so prepared. Like, I remember when we did a firm retreat or a team retreat, and it was like, there was no retreat about it. We were working the entire time, and we had like this simulation on things, and you were so prepared compared to the rest of us. Or you're like, actually, I was not prepared at all for that. But
I probably did more preparation, but felt underprepared. That's interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that, like, you really worked and prepared for that. And so that's interesting. Another question that was asked, and I like this one. What is the most shocking thing said to you? And do you wish you had handled it differently?
Like discussing gender.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody who has a male who has been in this field for a long time. We're talking about family, and this is before I had kids or was trying to have a kid. And I was told 33. That's when you can have kids.
Wow.
You weren't told that, Josh Edlow.
No, I was not.
It just is an interesting thing, because I, as we've talked about earlier, was probably thinking that, that is something that I want to be sure that I do is build my career and build that foundation so that I can, focus on that before adding to our lives in that way. But it was just, it threw me back.
That someone had the audacity to tell you when you should have kids. Yeah.
I mean, it's a suggestion.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like they were asserting it as a suggestion.
It, it was casual. It wasn't, it was an interesting conversation that I didn't think I would have in a work-like environment.
Well, I can tell you a couple of stories that, I mean, obviously didn't happen to me, but that I've heard of that were really surprising to me. I remember one of our colleagues sharing, and she showed up to a deposition, and I think it was her first or second year of practice, and walked in, and the attorney on the other side asked her if she was the court reporter.
Oh, that happens a lot.
Yeah. That, I was like, how insulting is that?
Yeah.
I mean, and I was just like, when she told me that, I go, I just hope you destroyed his client in that depot. That's just so terrible. And then I remember specifically, I was in a trial. I shared this with you, Kelsey. One of the more shocking things I had heard. She was a female partner at a defense firm, and wasn't particularly a big fan of her. But we were trying a case, and in the midst of the case, she had brought a motion that she wanted the judge to hear. And she was going to lose. Look, she was going to lose the motion. She should have lost the motion, right? So, and I won. We won. And so, but in chambers, she was really arguing hard on this motion, and you got to respect that. She's working hard even though it's a losing motion. And the judge, and previously we had some pretrial motions that she had her male associate come in and argue before trial, but he was not present during the trial. And the judge looked at her and said, would you like Mr. So-and-so to come in and argue this motion for you? And she was like, what is that supposed to mean? And I was just sitting there kind of like, yeah, what was that supposed to mean? You know what I mean? Like, that was kind of a dick move, and he reined it back in after that. But I was just like, wow, that just doesn't seem like something you say.
Right. Or that you want to hear in that situation. Absolutely.
Especially considering who she was, because as much as I didn't like her, she was a trial attorney. She was a formidable one, partner at a law firm. I mean, had really done a good job. She may cheat here and there on the trial, but like she's, a formidable attorney. And I was really surprised that you could get to that level and someone would still say something like that to you. It's really surprising.
I don't think I don't think that judge meant it to be, sexist or misogynistic or anything like that. But I think that when you're in that situation, you feel that.
Well, you got to know your audience. I mean, and on top of that, also, I got to tell you, I kind of do, I mean, I do think he meant that. And so, and he's a judge I completely respect. I think he's a pretty good judge too. At least he was in the trial. So that was really, so I was really surprised that he said that.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's another question. How do you remain a powerhouse while also dealing with these sexist remarks? And I'd even go so far as to, we hear sometimes about microaggressions too. I would include that to it.
I think we are trained to go push forward and go on. I think that I have maybe a coping mechanism of, they can say that, I'm going to prove them wrong. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to stick my ground and show them that I'm real smart and I know what I'm doing and I deserve to be here. It's harder when you're starting to be able to do that and to kind of have that confidence that you need to do that. But to pretend and have the blind confidence of I deserve to be in this room is a huge part of, okay, let's not get wrapped up in that's going on and move forward prosecuting and helping my client move forward here.
Feeding off of the last discussion, and this question here, and particularly when it comes to microaggressions, because you mentioned, you're like, well, I don't think the judge really meant that, but in that context, you could see how it could be taken like that, or something to that effect.
Yeah,
right?
I wasn't there, so I don't know.
Yeah. But do you think, like, we hear a lot about microaggressions, and I believe they do exist, right? And then you do also have these overt experiences where someone says, are you the court reporter, or something of that nature, that's just overt, rude, and sexist, right? Do you think, knowing that those exist, that you kind of that it's almost like can in some instances become a self-fulfilling prophecy in some way?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think maybe that you put yourself in a smaller role to not maybe have to deal with that, or you, maybe it is self-fulfilling in that way. But I do think, and actually at the last Sonoma seminar we went to, there was like a really interesting discussion with women bringing up these instances that they've dealt with, and men in the room, all trial attorneys, all mostly white middle-aged men, asking, how can we help you? Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a really good conversation of how you can help your young female associate go through this, or how you can, instead of just letting that comment go, say something as an advocate of, hey, that's not appropriate, or that's not how we should be acting in this situation. And it was a great conversation, I thought, to kind of have an open discussion of how do we help women who maybe don't feel as comfortable in this field.
So you're saying that what the answer kind of was, yeah, the way you can help is when you see it, call it out?
Definitely. That was one of the biggest points that was brought up, for sure.
Yeah.
Because you might be a partner at a firm with more power in the room. You shouldn't expect your young female associate, or even co-counsel, to necessarily bring it up, because she's likely in shock that it happened. She likely doesn't want to address the situation and wants to read it in a way that wasn't derogatory, that wasn't addressed to me, that wasn't meant to cut me down, like I did with the story that you just brought up. So to address it has more power, coming from you, or coming from a man in the room.
Interesting. I think also, when I was talking about the self-fulfilling prophecy, I think what I mean is I was talking to somebody recently about how, talking about just in general relationships, if somebody acts a certain way or does something that's hurtful or offensive to you, and they do it enough times, that eventually at some point you almost start looking for it. And so then even things that, like, maybe they weren't intending it to be offensive, you view it in the same way, right? Because you're so used to this person doing this certain thing, that now when they do things that kind of look like it but are not the same, suddenly you attribute that same intention to something even though it wasn't there. Do you think that sometimes, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe that's not what happens, but do you think that sometimes, because you have seen now so much sexism and microaggressions and things like that, that there are times like what I just did, right, where I was like, that sounded sexist. You're like, well, maybe he didn't mean it that way. But because I've seen it certain times, I'm like, no, I think that definitely is. Do you think you kind of maybe have some of that too at times?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Do you ever, how do you fight against that? Because, like, we hear about this in society right now, right? Like, there's a lot of discussion about, different movements of things that are going on, Me Too being a big one, other things like that. And then the argument on the other side is, in some ways, sometimes people get lumped in that maybe shouldn't get lumped into that, or it goes a little too far. And what do you think would be a good way in this context specifically? Do you sometimes self-reflect and kind of go, maybe that wasn't that way, or how do you fight against that?
I wish I was better. I think that I myself fall into sometimes, as much as I want to be an advocate for women, and, I do fall into, maybe I stay in my lane and get my work done and prove.
Man, we're having some real issues here with the, okay, hold on. You there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead and say that again.
I said, I think that I am very susceptible to wanting to stay in my lane and do my job instead of ruffling feathers and creating, maybe more attention to something that might, I don't know, not be good. But I wish I was better at being an advocate. And I do think if I was in the situation, I would do that. Maybe I'm lucky that I haven't had to be in that situation yet. But it's really easy to, this is part of the job.
Yeah. I've talked with, and I don't know, Liz and I, this is the first time I've had teenage daughters, right? So I don't really know. And I'm having to have a lot of conversations that I never thought I'd have to have. And, but I remember talking to my daughters about this issue and others, and my sons to some degree too, and just saying, like, sometimes, things are going to happen, and they're going to hurt you, and there's not really, there might be a glass ceiling, there might be something there that isn't fair, and you're going to see it, and it's going to be an injustice, and that's unfortunate. But you got to keep moving forward regardless. Just because somebody says something hurtful doesn't mean it's true, and shouldn't stop you, shouldn't push you off course.
Right. Right. And I think that,
do you agree with that, or do you think there's something else that should be said?
Well, yeah, I think I would add to that you should bring others with you. So I don't remember, some female in business, some woman in business said, like, you should bring other women up with you, and instead of competing with them, which we sometimes have a tendency to do, but bring them with you instead of not doing that, whatever the alternative to that would be. Right. So I would add that to what you're saying to your kids.
Interesting. Okay. That actually brings me to the next question that someone asked, and that was, can your appearance sway the feelings you want to portray to the jury? And that's an interesting question, because I can tell you that I have a lot of feelings on this.
Tell me your feelings, Josh.
No, well, you absolutely can, negatively, which is so surprising, because I remember in my early days as a trial attorney, if you have a female client, the jurors you have to worry about are the other women. It's really surprising.
Yeah, women pay a lot more attention to what other women are wearing, makeup, bags, shoes, jewelry, than men could ever imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think a lot about my appearance in a way that I probably shouldn't, but, like, is my hair too long? Is it too blonde? It's really dark right now. Are people taking me seriously? Am I wearing too much makeup? Am I, like, are my clothes too tight to draw attention to me? So I want to look like I'm put together, but not draw attention. I want to be pretty plain, but that I put some effort in. And so it's kind of always a fine line.
So explain why you think that's so important, particularly when it
I
comes to
think
trial.
because I don't want distractions.
Mm.
I don't want anybody to be thinking about my necklace that I keep playing with on this video, instead of what I'm talking about. And so, I to eliminate any distraction from what I'm actually saying is my goal.
Mm.
And people look at women's clothing and what they're wearing and how they present themselves in a different way, especially other women.
That's another difference is that, I mean, the only thought I've ever thought about when it came to trial, when it came to my clothes, was make sure you're wearing a suit, dark colors, white or blue shirt. And that's it. You know what I mean? I really don't. And I shared this story with you. I remember my first trial in Merced. There was me, I was the associate, my managing partner was there as well. And then the defense had a managing partner who was probably the same age as my managing partner. And then he had a female associate that was probably 2 years older than me in time as an attorney. And it was a month-long trial. She had done literally every deposition, every motion, every writing. She had done everything on that case. I came into the case, you know, I came into the case after I became an attorney. So the case had already been going on for about 2 years when I came on to it. So I knew the case, but she had been on it from the beginning. And so she probably was she knew more about the case than anybody else in the room. I mean, really. And she came in every day, dressed to the nines. I mean, hair was perfect, very nice clothes. I mean, designer clothes, wearing heels, looking professional, but looking very well put together, flashy put together. And talking to the jury, we got a big verdict at the end. We won the case, and we're talking to the jury. Nobody took her seriously, and I was really surprised because she knew everything about the
Do you
case.
think it was her appearance?
I do. I 100% think it was because, like you said, and I've learned this just in trial and working with females in trial and learn from our managing partners. And that is that we tell our clients, don't dress flashy, don't wear too much makeup, hair up, not because we're trying to put something on, but we don't want the jurors to judge her in a certain way. And, the men were very attracted to the woman. The women seemed to not like her, and it was really surprising. There were comments on what she was wearing from the jurors afterwards. No comments about anything anyone else was wearing. It was surprising.
It's like an inevitability, but it feels like that's such a hard thing to go into a trial knowing that that's going to matter.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is that it's just so surprising that she was. Now, I would also say, caveat to that, she knew more than anybody else. She did not sound necessarily all the time like she really knew what she was doing. I mean, she was a third-year associate. She probably had, I mean, it was probably her first trial just like mine, right? So I don't think either one of us, looking back, really knew like we knew what we were doing.
Right.
But I was certainly not judged as harshly as she was.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty.
I've been talking about my mom a lot.
Uh-huh.
I had the opportunity to try a case in federal court, and I was very nervous about it. I was with Roger, and I was very nervous about my witness. It just felt like such a bigger stage. And my mom said, be sure you keep your voice low. And at the time I was like, Mom, that is sexist and rude. like, how dare you ask me to change my voice? But sometimes me and other women, our voice goes higher, and it is something we probably have to think about, to keep
Yeah.
our voice lower than it naturally wants to go, because other people think that it can be shrill, or that it could be it's different than what you're used to hearing, and that could have an impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, so those were the most of, I think I actually hit all of the questions from listeners, but I had a couple of questions just specifically on how your life has changed now that you are a working mother.
Okay.
I know this is, and I really want to give you the opportunity to do this, just because in just knowing you, I know that how hard it was for you, and I know you had to go through a lot to get pregnant in the first place, and how excited you were when you and Patrick finally were able to get pregnant. And what's it been like? I mean, this is what you wanted for so many years, and you've joined the ilk now. You've joined us. So what's it like?
It's great. I feel blessed. I feel tired. I feel I was a very anxious pregnant person, and I am a more relaxed mom, which doesn't happen, but sometimes does happen if you deal with infertility.
So you were anxious, just you were afraid like you lose it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I had some some anxiety about the other shoe dropping. We were so excited to be able to do this after failing for so long that that was bogging down on me. And then as a mom, I felt more relief than I was anticipating feeling, which is interesting. But yeah, I've always wanted to be a working mom, and I really, so far, it's only been 2 months, but I really enjoy it. And I do feel like I'm able to really enjoy the time that I spend with her, and the time that I get to go to work and do my job and use my brain.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Do you have you noticed, I mean, I know it's only been 2 months, but have you noticed what are the differences now as a trial attorney mother as compared, and it may be too early for you to really know, but I mean, what are the differences between now and before?
I'm way more efficient with my time.
That's so true.
Yeah, it really, I used to always say, there's no reason, I can stay late, no problem. There's nothing keeping me at home. My husband's probably at work still. And now things are on a tighter schedule. Absolutely. And I have to think about childcare a lot more than I used to, about who is going to be there when we need to let the nanny go, who's going to be there if the nanny gets sick, whatever that is. What I think your question is getting at is, I've had 3 potential cases come in that involve kids being killed. And that's the hardest part of our job, is dealing with families who have had such a huge loss. But it's harder to shake. I'm not trying to shake it, but it's harder to not take that home with you and keep it as professional as I think I was able to do before. It really hits differently.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed when I started having kids was, I remember like if I went to a mall or something like that, and before I had kids, and I'd see like some kid throwing a tantrum or some kid acting up, it'd be like, what a terrible parent. You know what I mean? And then after I had kids, I'd be like, what a terrible kid. You know what I mean? Like
the blame shifts. Yeah.
And just and also going to restaurants and like kids being unruly in a restaurant or whatever. And I would just be so annoyed at those. I'd be like, why did you bring those kids here? You terrible people, And then afterwards, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, those poor parents, they just want a night out. They just want to be able to go out and eat and not have to cook, So, just, it's so interesting how much more sympathetic to parents you become
Yeah,
when it comes to that.
absolutely.
Also noticed how much more like human fecal matter becomes a part of your vernacular. You notice that yet? Has that come? You're
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
am not afraid to poop anymore.
Definitely have more conversations about vomit and poop in my house I think I've ever had. My
Yeah.
favorite is, she burps and you're like, yay, great job, Josie, good burp. And my mother-in-law said, no one really cheers for me when I burp like that.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. I was actually just thinking about this recently and saying I purposely, I have a sister who's 21 years younger than me. And so there were opportunities to change diapers. And I would change pee diapers, but I'm like, that is not my child. I am not changing a poopy diaper. Period. The end. I never changed a poopy diaper until my kids came along. And then I thought I'd have a problem with it, but it's just for some whatever reason. If it's one of your, I still to this day have never changed a poopy diaper of another person's child, but mine, like, no problem.
No problem. That's good.
I'll do them all. I'll do
That's a
them
good
all.
dad thing for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, it's interesting how it changes you. And I also think the other thing that's so interesting, and this came more to me when I had my second child, because I loved my first so much. Like I loved my oldest son so much. I remember when the second one was coming, I was like, how am I possibly going to love this next one the way I love this one? Like I don't have that much love to give. Am I going to start loving this one less because now I have to split that love? You know what I mean? And then
You're just marginalized.
yeah, and then the second one comes and you're like, oh, I have more,
Yeah,
and
that's great.
it's different. And so it's just so interesting how much more empathetic and sympathetic and how much more love you have. It definitely calmed me down quite a
Yeah.
bit.
I think that going through infertility stuff
Mm.
made me more empathetic and sympathetic 100%. And I
Mm.
don't know if I'd be the same mom if I didn't struggle to get here in the way that we did.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how, I mean, I know that different, we have pretty different views on religion and faith and things like that. Isn't it interesting though that life somehow kind of gives you what you need to make you grateful? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that myself. Like you know some of the struggles that I've gone through over the course of the last few years, and one of the things that has been so amazing to me about that has been the effect it has had on bringing me so much closer to my children. And how much more. I mean, I think you even commented about how my view on I have become so much less stringent and so less maybe judgy, I guess, of people who struggle with things that are outside the box. And I'm actually really grateful in that way, because sometimes things happen and it kind of makes you into all these terrible things can happen to you, or these struggles that make you just a better person for what
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
And when you're in it, doesn't feel like that's happening, right? Doesn't feel
Right.
like you're growing. It feels like you're getting beat down. And if you can, progress or get past or whatever the word is, grow from it and look back,
Yeah,
it's nice to see that change. Yeah.
definitely. Well, man, we've been going for almost 2 hours, and
I did
you
not
told
know
me
I had 2 hours to give to you, Josh.
I,
So
I didn't. That's why I'm sitting here and I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. And I'm like, she's got a baby and I've got kids somewhere. I got to figure out where they are. So, thanks for coming on and sharing. I think this was a good, and we're definitely going to have you back. As I told you before, I'm trying to get somebody on here to talk about specifically the recent decision. What was the name of the case again?
Dobbs.
What was it?
Dobbs.
Dobbs, which is the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, and have her come on and discuss the legalities of it. And I want you to come on when I do that.
All
So,
right.
All right. Well,
I
thanks for
told you,
coming
I'll
on.
never forget scrolling Twitter as I'm being induced to bring my lovely daughter into this world and seeing it is leaked that Roe is being overturned and just losing it. Man, that was a lot.
And losing it. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely save that discussion. We'll have that discussion when we have the person coming on I'm trying to get someone on here who's kind of an expert in constitutional law in that field. So if we do, you'll come on and you'll help me go with that discussion. So,
yeah. Thanks for having me, Josh.
All right. Thank you.